I wasn't just excluded from my daughter's wedding, she asked me to give her an apartment as a gift. And I did, but not the one she expected. Emily, who had always been fiercely independent, suddenly wanted a huge favor. Her new husband, Daniel, and she were searching for a place, and she thought I should buy it for them. I was stunned. The audacity. But it wasn't just the request, it was the fact that I hadn't even been invited to the wedding. Something had shifted, and it hurt more than I realized. That I've always considered myself a strong woman, a survivor. I had to be. Life, in its unpredictable way, had never been kind to me. I had to learn early on how to fend for myself, how to push through the days even when it felt like there was no way out. And, of course, I had to do it all for Emily, my daughter. It was always about her, always would be. At 63, my life had been anything but ordinary. I had been through more than most people would ever care to imagine, but I never let it break me. Not after Tom died. Not after the hardships we faced as a single mother trying to raise a child on my own. You see, losing Tom when Emily was only 3 meant I had to shoulder the weight of our little family by myself. There were no extended family members to lean on. My parents had passed when I was young, and Tom's family was mostly out of the picture. So, I was it. For a long time, it was just the two of us, me and Emily. And when you raise a child on your own, you make sacrifices, you learn to stretch every dollar, and you find ways to fill the roles of both mother and father. I worked long hours at a job that barely paid the bills, always picking up extra shifts just to make sure that Emily had everything she needed. She deserved the world, and even if I couldn't give her everything she wanted, I made sure she had what mattered most: love, stability, and the belief that she could be anything. Despite the struggles, I never regretted it. Emily grew up to be everything I had hoped for. She was determined, smart, and fiercely independent, traits that filled me with pride, even as they started to create a distance between us. When she graduated college, I could hardly believe how far she had come. She had done it. She had made something of herself, and I was so proud. My little girl was now a successful young woman working in marketing and making a name for herself in the business world. She had her own apartment, her own life. And when she bought her first home, I couldn't help but smile with pride. But as Emily grew more independent, I began to notice a shift. A subtle one at first, but it was there. She wasn't calling as often. Our long talks on the phone were replaced by text messages, which, over time, turned into just a couple of words. I told myself it was nothing, that it was just a phase. She was busy with work, with life, with her own future. But I knew, deep down, something was changing. And that something became clear when Daniel entered the picture. At first, I was happy for her. Emily deserved to be happy. She deserved someone who would support her dreams, someone who would stand by her. Daniel seemed charming enough. He was good-looking, confident, and, from the outside, seemed like a nice guy. Emily, for the first time in years, seemed genuinely excited about a relationship. And I, being her mother, wanted to believe that this was a good thing. But, as the months passed, I began to notice something unsettling. She was changing, and not in the ways I had expected. Daniel was becoming more and more of a presence in her life, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was slowly taking over. It wasn't just the time she spent with him, but the way he seemed to shift her thinking. The way her priorities seemed to shift. She was spending less and less time with me, and when we did talk, it was always about him, about their plans, their future. And then there were the little comments she made about him. "He thinks we should be more independent, Mom," Emily said one evening, her voice hesitant, like she wasn't sure how I would take it. "He doesn't want me to rely on you so much. He says we should focus on building our own life together." It sounded so innocent at first, like just another phase in their relationship. But when I really thought about it, when I really let the words sink in, something didn't sit right. Independent, sure. But it felt like he was trying to push me out of the picture. And it wasn't the first time I'd heard something like that. Emily's voice, once full of warmth and affection when she spoke about me, now had an edge of defensiveness, like she was apologizing for needing me. I tried to brush it off, but the unease kept growing. A few months later, Emily called me one evening, and I could tell immediately that something was off. There was a coldness in her voice that I hadn't heard in years. She told me about the wedding, how they had decided to keep it small, intimate. "It was just us, Mom," she explained. "We thought it would be best this way." Best? Best for who? I hadn't been invited. I hadn't even known the wedding was happening until after it was over. And even then, it was a passing mention, like she was telling me about a minor detail in her life that didn't matter all that much. I felt the sting of exclusion deep in my chest, but I tried to hide it, tried to tell myself it wasn't that big of a deal. After all, she was happy. She had found someone she wanted to spend her life with. That's what mattered, right? But then, a few weeks later, she called me again. And that was when things took a turn. "Mom, we need a new place to live," she said casually, as though she were asking for something insignificant. "You understand how important this apartment is for us." I froze. What was she saying? She was asking me for an apartment. Not a small loan, not a hand-me-down from my savings. No, she wanted me to buy her an entire apartment as a gift. I was speechless. I didn't even know how to respond. All those years of hard work, of sacrifices, of sleepless nights, was this how it all ended? With a request like this? And not just any request. It was a demand, wrapped up in the veneer of a casual conversation. I didn't want to admit it, but the truth was clear to me now. Emily, my strong, independent daughter, was no longer the same person. Daniel had woven himself so completely into her life that she had begun to ask for things she would never have even considered before. The woman I had raised to be strong, to make her own way in the world, was now asking me to support her life financially in a way that felt more like control than care. I sat there, stunned into silence, trying to make sense of what was happening. But this wasn't just about money. It wasn't even about the apartment. It was about the distance, the growing divide between us. My daughter, my Emily, was slipping away from me, and I wasn't sure I could do anything to stop it. The request for the apartment hit me harder than I could ever have anticipated. I sat there on the phone with Emily, her words echoing in my mind, trying to process what she had just asked me. I was speechless. My mind raced in 1,000 directions, trying to grasp how it had come to this, how my daughter, the one I had raised with such care and sacrifice, had come to ask for something like this. But I was also trying to understand why she was asking for it, why it felt so wrong, and why it hurt so much. "Mom, we really need this," Emily had said, her voice distant, almost rehearsed. "You know how important this apartment is for us. It's not just about a place to live, it's about building our future. You know how hard we've been working, and we're just not making enough progress." I felt the weight of those words like a crushing blow, and I couldn't breathe for a moment. The words kept spinning around my head, and as they did, they stirred something deep inside of me. It wasn't just the audacity of the request, it was the fact that, in a way, this was the culmination of everything that had been going wrong between us for months, maybe even years. I had been seeing the signs, but had ignored them, thinking they were just temporary. But now, everything came into focus. She wasn't just asking me for money, she was asking me to fund her life, to give her a home, and to give up my last remaining semblance of control over the situation. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This was about control. Daniel had become a part of her life so completely that he didn't just have a say in the little things, he was steering the ship. I had been watching it happen, and though I hated to admit it, I couldn't ignore it any longer. He was pulling her away from me, pushing her further into his world. And now, he wanted me to finance it. The thought stung like a slap across the face, and I had to gather myself. "Emily, I began, trying to keep my voice steady, but she interrupted me before I could finish. "Mom, I don't want to upset you, but Daniel and I have talked about this, and we think it's what's best for us. We know it's a big ask, but we just don't know where else to turn." I could hear the uncertainty in her voice, and it killed me. I had always prided myself on being the one she could count on. The one who had made sure she never had to face the world alone. And now, here she was, asking for something so large and demanding, so out of step with everything I had tried to teach her about self-sufficiency. It was a moment of reckoning. I could no longer deny it, Emily was no longer the independent young woman I had raised. She was falling into a pattern of dependence that I couldn't recognize. And it wasn't just financial dependence, though that was a big part of it, it was emotional dependence on Daniel, a man I didn't trust, who had slowly and quietly reshaped her world without me even noticing. I didn't know how to respond. Every part of me wanted to say no, to stand firm, to make her realize how damaging this was. But how could I? She was my daughter. I had raised her to be strong, to be capable, to stand on her own 2 feet. But now, she was asking me to give her something I knew wasn't a gift, it was a trap. I tried to keep my voice calm as I spoke. "Emily, I love you, you know that. But I need you to understand, this isn't something I can just give you. You're asking for an apartment, one that's worth a lot of money, and I just don't think this is the right move. You need to be careful. She didn't take it well. I could feel her frustration building on the other end of the line, and I knew I had crossed a line she wasn't ready to accept. She had come to me with a need, a demand, and she expected me to fulfill it without question. I don't understand why you're being so difficult, Mom, she snapped. Daniel and I just need this. And you always say you'll be there for me. Well, now I need you. I don't want to ask for this, but we don't have any other options. Her words, though coated in hurt, felt like daggers. They cut through me, making me feel smaller, weaker, and more isolated than I had in years. I had always prided myself on being the one Emily could rely on, the one who would never let her down. And now, she was accusing me of being difficult for wanting to protect her. She didn't see it. She couldn't. She was too far gone. I had been the one to raise her, to teach her how to survive on her own. She didn't need me to solve every problem she faced. But somewhere along the way, I had stopped being the mother she turned to for guidance, and started becoming the person she turned to for financial support. It wasn't just this apartment, it was everything that had been building up over the past few years. The growing distance between us, the way Daniel had woven himself into her life, the way he had slowly replaced me without me even realizing it. But the moment that would change everything came when I learned about the wedding. It wasn't the wedding itself that shocked me, it was the fact that I wasn't invited. I had always assumed I would be there, that Emily wouldn't have left me out of such an important day. After all, I had been there for everything. I was the one who stayed up late with her when she was sick as a child, the one who cheered the loudest at her high school graduation, the one who had supported her every step of the way. How could she not want me there? I found out about the wedding by accident. Emily had posted a photo on social media, a picture of her and Daniel, holding hands, standing in front of a beautiful backdrop of flowers and candles. The caption read, "Married my best friend today." There was no mention of family, no acknowledgement of me, and certainly no invitation. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. How could she do this? How could she leave me out of such an important day in her life? I stared at the photo, the words blurring in front of my eyes as tears welled up. I had been excluded. My daughter, my flesh and blood, had married without me. She had started a new life, and I wasn't even a part of it. I tried to call her, tried to get her to explain herself, but she didn't pick up. I left a message, asking why she hadn't invited me, what was going on. But all I got in return was a simple text, "Mom, we just wanted to keep it small. I didn't want to hurt you." But it hurt. It hurt more than anything had in a long time. It wasn't just about the wedding, it was about the distance, the coldness, the growing chasm between us that I couldn't bridge. The moment I found out about Emily's wedding, her small, private wedding that I wasn't invited to, was the moment I realized that something deep and irreversible had shifted between us. It wasn't the wedding itself that hurt the most, although that certainly stung. It wasn't even the fact that I had been excluded from the biggest day of her life. What truly broke me was the realization that she no longer felt the need to have me by her side. She had moved on from me, not in the physical sense, but in the emotional sense. I had spent years raising Emily to be independent, to stand on her own 2 feet, but never in a million years had I imagined that independence would lead her to shut me out. The wedding, the apartment request, and now, this, everything seemed to be falling apart. And the worst part was, I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it all started. I had always been there for her, through every obstacle, every challenge, every heartbreak. And now, it felt like I was invisible to her. I tried to shake off the hurt. I tried to convince myself that maybe I was overreacting. That maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought. But deep down, I knew the truth. My daughter had changed, and not in a way I could accept. She had become someone I didn't recognize, someone who was more concerned with pleasing Daniel than she was with keeping the bond we once had. As I sat there, staring at the wedding photo on my phone, a knot twisted in my stomach. I didn't know what to feel anymore. Anger? Yes. Betrayal? Absolutely. But more than that, I felt an overwhelming sense of loss. I had lost her, and I wasn't sure if I could ever get her back. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about me being excluded from the wedding. This wasn't just about the apartment request, either. No, this was about something much deeper. This was about Daniel's influence over her, his subtle manipulation that had driven a wedge between us. He had wormed his way into Emily's life, turning her against me without her even realizing it. And I had been too blind to see it until it was too late. I had tried to be supportive of their relationship at first. I had tried to be welcoming, to accept him into our lives. But something about him always rubbed me the wrong way. There was always something off about him. He was charming, yes. But there was a coldness to him, an air of calculation that I couldn't ignore. He had a way of controlling the conversation, of steering Emily in the direction he wanted her to go. And she followed him, blindly, without question. But now, as I sat in the silence of my home, I knew I couldn't just sit back and let this continue. I couldn't allow her to be manipulated any longer. She was my daughter, and I had fought too hard to get her to this point to let someone like Daniel tear our relationship apart. I had to do something. But what? I spent the next few days in a daze, trying to figure out my next steps. I called Emily a few times, but each time, she either didn't answer or gave me the cold, detached version of herself that had become so familiar. I left messages, pleading with her to talk to me, to explain why she had shut me out. But each response was more distant than the last. The distance between us had become insurmountable. It wasn't until I sat down and thought about it long and hard that I realized what needed to be done. If Emily wouldn't listen to me, if she wouldn't see what Daniel was doing to her, then I would have to show her. I couldn't just sit back and watch her lose everything. I had to protect her, even if she couldn't see it yet. That was when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I hired a private investigator. It was a decision I never thought I would make, but I knew it was the only way to get the truth. I had to know who Daniel really was. I had to uncover his past, his motivations, and his true intentions before it was too late. The investigator I hired was thorough. He dug deep into Daniel's background, uncovering information that made my blood run cold. Daniel wasn't who he claimed to be. He had a history of manipulating women, of using them to get what he wanted. He had a reputation for getting close to wealthy women, ingratiating himself into their lives, and then taking everything they had. It wasn't just about the money. It was about control. I felt a sickening sense of dread as I read through the investigator's report. This man wasn't just using Emily for her money, he was using her for her trust, for her love. He had gotten inside her head, and now he was slowly and methodically taking over her life, piece by piece. I knew I had to act fast. Emily needed to know the truth. She needed to see the man she had married for who he really was. But how could I get through to her? How could I make her see that everything she believed in was built on a lie? I decided to send her a gift, something that would force her to confront the truth. But it wouldn't be the kind of gift she was expecting. I packaged the investigator's report neatly, with all the damning evidence, and sent it to her. I knew it was a risk. I knew it could push her away for good. But at that point, I had nothing left to lose. She needed to see the truth, even if it broke her heart. I didn't hear from her for days after that. I spent my time pacing around my house, wondering if I had made a mistake. What if this destroyed our relationship for good? What if she never spoke to me again? The fear gnawed at me, but I couldn't stop myself. I had done the right thing. I had to trust that Emily would see the truth eventually, no matter how painful it was. When the call finally came, it was late at night. My heart skipped a beat when I saw her name on the caller ID. Mom? Emily's voice was shaky, uncertain. I got the package. I could hear the tremor in her voice, the crack in her facade. I took a deep breath and steadied myself. This was it. The moment of truth. I know you're angry, Emily, I said softly. But I had to show you. I couldn't just stand by and watch him manipulate you. You deserve so much more than this. She was quiet for a long time. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, and I knew she was processing everything. I don't know what to say, she finally whispered. I don't know what to believe anymore. The call from Emily lingered in my mind, playing over and over again, each word she had said hanging in the air like an unanswered question. Her voice had been a mix of confusion, disbelief, and, if I dared to admit it, a bit of anger. I could understand her reaction. I had just thrown a bombshell into her life, one she wasn't ready to hear. She had loved Daniel, trusted him, and here I was, her mother, accusing him of manipulating her. She had never expected that from me, and I couldn't blame her for feeling betrayed. But I had to stay strong. I had to be the one who held firm, because if I didn't, who would? The reality I had uncovered was painful and ugly, but it was the truth. And as much as I hated to admit it, the truth was sometimes more painful than the lie. I had always promised myself that I would do whatever it took to protect Emily, even if it meant hurting her in the short term. I couldn't pretend it didn't hurt, though. I had been the one to raise her, to teach her about trust, love, and all the things that matter most. And now, here I was, the person she seemed to trust the least. I couldn't fathom how it had all gone so wrong. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had allowed myself to become a passive observer in my own daughter's life. I had allowed Daniel to weave his influence around her so completely that I was no longer a priority. He had slowly and quietly become the center of her world. I had watched it happen, unable to stop it, because Emily was an adult. She had the right to make her own choices. But those choices had led her down a dangerous path, one where she was too close to someone who wasn't who he appeared to be. The man who had won her heart wasn't the person I thought he was. He was a manipulator, someone who knew exactly how to get what he wanted, and he had set his sights on Emily, and on everything she had. The guilt gnawed at me. Had I been too harsh? Had I gone too far in my attempt to protect her? What if I had ruined everything, not just for Emily but for myself as well? What if this was the end of our relationship? What if she never spoke to me again? The worst part was that, in some ways, I felt like I had failed her. I had always tried to do what was best for Emily, always tried to guide her in the right direction. But somewhere along the way, I had missed the signs. I had let this happen. I had let Daniel slip through the cracks, pretending to be the loving partner when, in reality, he was just using her. I couldn't sit idly by anymore. I had to do something to prove that I was still her mother, that I was still the person who cared about her more than anyone else in the world. But how? How could I make her see that I was trying to protect her? How could I help her realize that Daniel wasn't the person she thought he was? I decided I couldn't leave it all in her hands. I couldn't just hope she would come around on her own. I had to show her the truth. But how? I had already given her the evidence, the investigator's report that laid out Daniel's manipulations in painstaking detail. But it wasn't enough. She needed to see it for herself. She needed to experience the manipulation firsthand, to feel what I had felt. The idea seemed drastic, even reckless, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized I had no other choice. I couldn't just let her continue down this path. I needed her to see the truth before it was too late. I reached out to the private investigator again. I needed to gather more information, to dig deeper into Daniel's past. I knew it was risky, but I was willing to do whatever it took. Emily deserved the truth, and if that meant digging into Daniel's financial dealings, his history with other women, his manipulative tactics, I would do it. I couldn't sit back and watch her lose everything because she was blinded by love. The investigator came through, and what he uncovered was even worse than I had imagined. Daniel wasn't just a con artist, he was a master manipulator. His relationships with women had always been transactional. He had been involved with wealthy women before, using them for access to their money and resources. There were countless reports of his charm, his ability to convince women that they needed him, that they couldn't live without him. And then, once he had them hooked, he would slowly drain them of everything they had, emotionally, financially, and mentally. The more I read, the angrier I became. I couldn't believe that Emily, my strong, independent daughter, had fallen into this trap. But I knew she had. I knew that, just like the women before her, she was being used, and she didn't even realize it. I spent the next few days in a blur, trying to figure out how to approach Emily. I couldn't just send her more evidence. I had already done that, and it had only pushed her further away. I needed a plan, something that would force her to see what I was seeing, something that would make her realize that I wasn't just trying to control her, that I was trying to protect her. But how could I do that without making things worse? I realized I had to confront her face to face. It was the only way. She needed to see my eyes, hear the sincerity in my voice, and understand that everything I had done, every action I had taken, was because I loved her. When I called her, my heart was pounding in my chest. I was terrified of what would happen next. Would she listen to me? Would she finally see the truth? Or would she push me away for good? Emily, I said, my voice trembling slightly, I need to talk to you. It's about Daniel. I know you're angry, but you have to understand, he's not who you think he is. He's manipulating you, and I can't just stand by and watch him destroy you. She was silent for a moment, and then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, she replied, I don't know what to believe anymore, Mom. I don't know who to trust. That was all I needed to hear. She was listening. She was finally open to hearing the truth. And that was the first step in saving her. I know this is hard, I said softly, fighting to keep my voice steady. But I need you to trust me. I've always had your best interests at heart. I've spent my whole life trying to protect you. And I know this is painful, but you need to see what Daniel is really doing. He's not the man you think he is. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. But then, finally, she spoke. I don't know if I can believe you, Mom. But I'll listen. I need to understand why you're doing this. That was all I needed. The door was open, just a crack, but it was enough. I wasn't going to give up on her. Not now. Not ever. I would do whatever it took to help her see the truth, to help her break free from this web of lies and manipulation Daniel had spun around her. Because Emily deserved to know the truth. She deserved to be free of the control Daniel had over her. That night, I sat in the quiet of my living room, reflecting on what had just happened. It was a small step, but it was a step in the right direction. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, Emily would be able to break free from Daniel's grip. Maybe she would understand why I had done what I had done. But I knew the road ahead would be long. The journey wouldn't be easy. But it was a journey I would walk with her, every step of the way. The days that followed Emily's tentative promise to listen were a blur. I spent the next few days obsessively rereading the investigator's report, going over every detail, searching for something I had missed. As I combed through the evidence, I felt a sense of growing urgency. Daniel's manipulations were so intricate, so subtle, that it was almost impossible to believe that Emily, the smart, independent woman I had raised, had fallen victim to them. How had she been so blind to what was happening? And, more importantly, why had she closed herself off to the possibility that someone she loved could hurt her in such a way? But no matter how many times I read the report, it still didn't feel like enough. I had given her the information, but I didn't feel like I had done enough to make her understand. It was as if Emily couldn't see past the man she had fallen in love with. She couldn't see the patterns, the subtle ways he had wormed his way into her life. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about showing her the facts. This wasn't about presenting her with a list of manipulations or documenting his history. It was about something deeper, something that had to do with trust, with the way Emily viewed herself and her relationship with me. I wasn't just fighting for her love, I was fighting for her self-worth. I was fighting for her to see that she deserved more than what Daniel had to offer, that she was worth more than the manipulation he had embedded in her life. The problem, of course, was that I wasn't sure how to fight this battle. How do you make someone see what they don't want to see? How do you convince a grown woman that her relationship is built on a lie, without tearing apart the very fabric of her identity? I knew that Emily wasn't stupid. She was smart, independent, and incredibly capable. She had worked hard to build her life. And yet, somehow, Daniel had convinced her that she needed him, that she couldn't be happy without him. He had convinced her that the life they were building together was better than anything she could do alone. I kept asking myself, how had this happened? When had Daniel become the center of her world? When had she started leaning on him so much, trusting him more than she trusted me, more than she trusted her own instincts? The more I thought about it, the more I realized how insidious Daniel's influence had been. It wasn't just the big things, his manipulation of her finances, his isolating her from me and other people who cared about her. It was the small things, the subtle ways he made her doubt herself. The way he suggested she needed to be more independent, that she needed to stop relying on her family so much, that she needed to trust him more than anyone else. He had convinced her that his opinions mattered more than anyone else's, that he was the one who knew what was best for her, even if that meant cutting out the people who had always been there for her. I couldn't just sit back anymore. Emily had already distanced herself from me, and I was afraid if I didn't act soon, I would lose her forever. But how? What could I possibly do to make her see the truth? It wasn't until I received a call from a friend of mine, someone who had worked with Emily's company in the past, that I realized what I needed to do. This friend had always been close to Emily, but even she had noticed the changes in her. She had reached out to me, asking if I had seen the way Emily was being treated. At first, I didn't know how to respond. I hadn't realized how much Daniel's influence had stretched into her professional life. But then, as we talked, the pieces began to fall into place. Daniel's manipulations weren't limited to just their personal relationship, he was involved in every aspect of Emily's life. He had even found ways to insert himself into her career, influencing the decisions she made at work, subtly pushing her to make choices that would benefit him, not her. It was then that I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just sit back and wait for Emily to see the truth. I had to take action. But the action I needed to take wasn't just about confronting Daniel directly, he was too clever for that. If I confronted him head-on, he would only lie, deny, and manipulate the situation to make it look like I was the one who was wrong. No, I needed to get ahead of this, to expose him for who he really was. I needed to show Emily exactly how far his manipulations had gone, and I needed to do it in a way that would make it impossible for her to ignore. But how could I do that without risking everything? How could I expose Daniel's true nature without losing Emily in the process? I couldn't afford to make a mistake. This was too important. This wasn't just about saving my relationship with her, it was about saving her from a life that could be destroyed by someone who didn't care about her at all. I spent the next few days gathering information, digging through every piece of evidence I had and looking for anything that could make the truth undeniable. The investigator had already given me a wealth of information, but I knew I needed more. I needed to know how deep Daniel's influence had gone, how far he had taken his manipulations, and how much control he truly had over her life. I spoke to more people who had worked with Daniel in the past, people who had seen the signs of his manipulative behavior and had been too afraid to speak up. Slowly, I pieced together a fuller picture of who he really was. And as the pieces fell into place, I realized just how dangerous this situation was. Daniel wasn't just a con artist, he was a predator, and he had been feeding off of Emily's love and trust for years. The more I uncovered, the more certain I became. I couldn't sit back anymore. I had to act, and I had to act fast. But I was terrified. What if Emily pushed me away? What if this plan backfired, and she chose Daniel over me? I had spent so many years being her protector, being the one who had always been there for her, that the thought of losing her over something like this was almost too much to bear. But then I reminded myself why I was doing this. I wasn't doing it because I was jealous of Daniel or because I wanted to control Emily's life. I was doing it because I loved her. I was doing it because, as much as she hated to admit it, she was being used. And if I didn't step in, she could lose everything she had worked so hard for, her independence, her career, and most of all, herself. This was the hardest thing I had ever done. But I knew it was the only way. I had to help Emily see the truth. I had to make her realize that the life she was building with Daniel wasn't real, it was a fantasy, a trap designed to keep her under his control. And as I set my plan into motion, I couldn't help but wonder, was this the moment everything would change? Or was I about to lose her forever? It wasn't long before my plan was set into motion. I had carefully thought it through, each detail accounted for. I knew the risks, but I also knew that I couldn't stand by and watch my daughter's life unravel without taking action. Emily was slipping away, and it was time for me to step in, even if it meant forcing her to face uncomfortable truths. I couldn't let her stay in this toxic relationship, even if it meant making her angry. The stakes were too high, and I couldn't lose her, not like this. I had spent days gathering information, carefully laying out the pieces of evidence that would expose Daniel's manipulation in ways Emily couldn't ignore. My mind raced as I thought about the conversation I was about to have with her. What if she rejected it all? What if she couldn't see the truth, no matter how clearly it was laid out before her? The fear gnawed at me, but I had to push it aside. This was the only way to save her. I had enlisted the help of my friend at the real estate agency, an insider who had a history with Daniel's previous financial dealings. She had given me access to records that revealed the full extent of his manipulation, including shady investments and deals that Emily had never been aware of. The truth was right there, waiting to be uncovered, but I needed to be careful in how I presented it. Emily had to see it for herself. She needed to recognize the patterns in Daniel's behavior before it was too late. The day came when I finally knew I had to confront her face to face. I couldn't rely on texts, calls, or emails anymore. I had to be there, in person, to make sure that she truly understood the gravity of the situation. I knew this was a risk. I knew it could drive a wedge between us that might never be bridged. But if I didn't act now, I could lose her forever. I called Emily and asked if we could meet. Her response was tentative at best. I could tell she was hesitant, still unsure of where this conversation was going to lead. But I could hear the underlying curiosity in her voice. Maybe, deep down, she knew something wasn't right. Maybe she was looking for a way out of the confusion that had clouded her life for so long. We agreed to meet at a local cafe, a neutral place where we could sit down and talk without interruptions. I arrived early, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for her to arrive. I had rehearsed what I would say 1,000 times in my head, but now that the moment was finally here, I was terrified. What if Emily didn't believe me? What if she thought I was just trying to control her life, that I was just an overprotective mother trying to break up her relationship? But deep down, I knew I had no choice. I couldn't stand by and watch her be consumed by Daniel's manipulation. I had to protect her. When Emily walked into the cafe, I could see the tension in her face. She was nervous, unsure of what was about to happen. I gave her a soft smile, hoping it would put her at ease, but the reality of the situation was that nothing was going to make this easy. She sat down across from me, her eyes guarded. "Hi, Mom," she said softly, her voice tentative, almost distant. "Hi, sweetheart," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm glad you came." There was a long silence before I spoke again, my heart in my throat. "Emily, I know this is hard to hear, but I need you to listen to me. I'm not here to attack you, but I can't keep watching you go down this path without doing something about it. Daniel is not who you think he is." I saw her stiffen, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Mom, please," she said, shaking her head, "I don't want to hear this. I know you're upset, but Daniel has always been good to me. He loves me. I know you don't like him, but—" I cut her off gently, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. "It's not just that I don't like him, Emily. It's that he's manipulating you. He's using you, and you don't even realize it." Her eyes widened, and I saw a flash of hurt in them before she quickly masked it with a defensive expression. "What are you talking about? I don't need you to tell me who loves me or who doesn't. I'm happy with him. Why can't you just accept that?" I could feel the wall going up, the same one I had been battling against for months. But I had to break through it. I had to get her to see that this wasn't just about my opinion. This was about her safety, her future, her well-being. "Emily, please," I said softly, "I'm not trying to control you. But Daniel's influence over you is so strong that you can't see it. He's isolating you. He's making you believe you need him more than anyone else. He's using your love for him to control you, and it's breaking my heart to watch this happen. I love you too much to sit by and let it continue." I could see the conflict in her eyes, the confusion and pain battling against the walls she had built up around herself. She opened her mouth as though to speak, but I held up my hand gently to stop her. "I have proof, Emily," I continued. "I've spent weeks gathering everything I could find, his financial records, the way he's manipulated you, the way he's wormed his way into your career, your relationships. I know this is hard, but you need to see the truth. You need to see who he really is before it's too late." I slid the folder across the table towards her. It was filled with documents, each one a piece of evidence against Daniel, financial transactions, messages, and reports detailing his manipulative tactics. I watched her hesitate, her eyes flicking to the folder and then back to me. "I don't want to do this," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't want to believe it." "I know," I said, my voice trembling. "But it's the truth. And you deserve to know it. You deserve to have the chance to make a choice for yourself, not because of the lies he's telling you." She stared at the folder for a long time, the weight of the decision hanging in the air between us. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she reached for the folder. For the first time in a long time, I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. She was listening. As she began to flip through the documents, I could see her face change. The disbelief was clear in her eyes as she read, slowly processing the information that I had presented. The shock was evident. Her brow furrowed as she read the details of Daniel's previous financial schemes, the ways he had manipulated other women, and how he had slowly gained control over her finances, her career, and ultimately, her life. The pieces started to fit together for her, and I could see the realization dawning on her. I waited in silence, my heart in my throat as I watched her absorb the truth. Every page she turned seemed to chip away at the walls she had built around herself, the protective bubble she had wrapped around her love for Daniel. And yet, I knew that this was only the beginning. She had to come to terms with everything she was reading, and that wouldn't happen overnight. The truth was painful, and it would take time for her to process it. Finally, she looked up from the papers, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Mom, I didn't know. I had no idea." The words hung in the air, and I felt the weight of them like a heavy burden. "I know, sweetheart," I said softly, my voice breaking with emotion. "I know you didn't. But now you do. And I'm here to help you through this, whatever happens." The silence between Emily and me after the realization settled was deafening. It wasn't the silence of rejection, though. It wasn't the silence I feared might come from her closing off from me entirely. No, this silence was heavy, weighted with the gravity of everything she had just discovered. She had been in love with a man who had woven a web of lies around her, one that had taken her trust and molded it into something he could control. It was a truth she never wanted to hear, and now that she had heard it, she was facing a choice that felt too big for her to handle alone. Emily sat there with the folder in her hands, her fingers lightly tracing over the pages, each document a dagger to her heart. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable as she flipped through the papers. Every so often, I saw her eyes widen, her jaw tighten, and her hands shake ever so slightly as she processed what was in front of her. "Mom," she finally said, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why didn't you say something earlier?" I didn't have an immediate answer, or at least not the one that would make this easier. I had to remind myself that this wasn't about making it easy for her, it was about protecting her, even if that meant she'd hate me for it. "Sweetheart, I tried," I whispered, my voice cracking. "I tried in so many ways. I wanted to protect you. But I saw the way you were slipping away from me. And I didn't know how to stop it. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how deep it went. And when I found out the truth, when I saw everything he was doing to you, I knew I had to show you, because you deserved to know." She nodded slowly, her face a mixture of disbelief and pain, like she was still processing the enormity of everything. I never imagined he was capable of something like this," Emily murmured, almost to herself. "He was always so good to me. He was the one who seemed to understand me, who made me feel like I was everything." "I know," I said, swallowing the lump in my throat. "He's good at that, Emily. He's good at making you feel like you're the center of his world. But that's how he controls you. He convinces you that you're nothing without him, that you owe him everything. And that's how he keeps you from seeing the truth." She let out a bitter laugh, almost like she was trying to release some of the tension that had built up in her. "And I let him. I gave him everything. I thought I was making the right choice, but I was too blind to see how much he was taking from me." I reached across the table, placing my hand on hers. "You weren't blind, Emily. You were in love, and love can sometimes make us do things we don't see coming. But now, you know the truth. And that's what matters." Emily stared at our hands, the weight of my words settling in as she processed everything. There was still a look of disbelief on her face, but I could see the slow, painful dawning of awareness in her eyes. She had been manipulated, and she had been living in a lie for so long that it was hard to imagine what life could look like outside of it. "I don't know what to do now, Mom," she said softly, her voice filled with fear. "I don't know how to walk away from this. I thought I had found my person, the one I was supposed to spend my life with. And now I find out that everything was just fake. Nothing that he made you believe was real, Emily," I said, my voice steady but soft. "I know it's hard to hear, but everything he built with you was built on lies. His love wasn't real, it was a manipulation. And you deserve more than that. You deserve someone who sees you for who you are, who loves you for yourself, not for what you can give them." She looked down at the table for a long time, the weight of everything finally hitting her. It was like a dam had broken, and all the emotions she had been holding in, confusion, anger, fear, came rushing to the surface. Tears filled her eyes, and she wiped them away quickly, but it was clear she was struggling to hold it together. "I don't know if I can do this, Mom," she whispered. "I don't know if I can walk away from everything I've built with him. It feels like I'm throwing away my entire future." "You're not throwing it away," I said firmly. "You're giving yourself the chance to build something real, something that's yours and only yours. It won't be easy, Emily. I'm not going to lie to you. It's going to be painful. But I'll be here. Every step of the way." For a long time, we sat in silence, the weight of the situation hanging in the air between us. I could feel the space between us closing, a fragile connection that had been broken, now slowly mending. Emily's walls were still up, but they were cracked, and I could see the cracks widening as she began to let herself feel everything that had been building up for months. "I don't know where to start," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to even begin untangling everything." "We'll start together," I said gently. "You don't have to do this alone. You don't have to carry this weight by yourself." "I don't know if I can trust anyone again, Mom," she admitted, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know if I can trust myself after all of this." "That's okay," I replied softly. "Trust takes time. It's something you have to rebuild, but we'll rebuild it together. And you will learn to trust yourself again. You're stronger than you realize, Emily." She nodded slowly, wiping away the last of her tears. "Thank you, Mom. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been here." I squeezed her hand gently. "You don't have to thank me, sweetheart. I've always been here for you. And I always will be." Emily sat back in her chair, letting out a long breath. The weight in the room seemed to shift, and though the road ahead would be difficult, there was a sense of relief in the air, a sense that the hardest part, the part where the truth was finally exposed, was over. "We'll figure this out together, Mom," she said with a quiet determination. "One step at a time." And for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't a big, bold hope, but it was enough. Enough to remind me that we could rebuild what had been broken. That Emily was strong enough to stand on her own, to reclaim her life from the manipulations that had stolen it from her. And that, together, we would face whatever came next. Emily stood up from the table, her posture a little straighter now, her face a little less guarded. She looked at me, a mix of uncertainty and determination in her eyes. "What now?" she asked, the question simple, but it held so much more weight than I could have imagined. "What now?" I echoed, standing up and walking over to her. "Now, we take it one day at a time. We start over. We rebuild, together. We heal." Emily nodded, her lips trembling as she tried to suppress a smile. "Yeah, together," she whispered, the words more powerful than I could have anticipated. And in that moment, despite everything we had been through, despite the pain and the heartache, I knew we could do it. We would be okay. We would find our way back to each other. And we would rebuild what had been lost, stronger than before. The days after Emily's realization were an emotional roller coaster. I watched her begin the long process of untangling herself from Daniel's hold, and though it was difficult to witness, it was also the beginning of her reclaiming control over her life. There were moments of doubt, moments when she faltered, when the weight of the situation threatened to overwhelm her. But through it all, I stood by her side, offering support, love, and patience. I had always known that Emily was strong, but now, I was seeing that strength in ways I never imagined. The first step, as always, was facing the truth. The truth that she had been manipulated, that the life she had been living wasn't as real as she had believed. It was devastating, but it was also freeing. She began distancing herself from Daniel, slowly at first, as though testing the waters, unsure of how much of her life she was ready to reclaim. It wasn't easy, and the process took longer than either of us expected, but each step forward was a victory. I watched Emily begin to rebuild her sense of self-worth. The confident, independent woman who had once felt like she could conquer anything began to re-emerge. She started cutting ties with the people Daniel had surrounded her with, people who had helped to isolate her. She started reconnecting with friends and family, with the people who truly cared about her. I could see her slowly regain her footing, each day a little more solid than the last. Still, the hardest moments came when she would turn to me, her voice trembling with the weight of everything she had lost. "Mom," she would say, "how did I let this happen? How did I let him control me like this?" There were times when I didn't know how to answer her, when the guilt in her voice made my heart ache. But I knew what I had to say. "You didn't let it happen, sweetheart. Love has a way of blinding us, of making us believe things that aren't true. You loved him, and that made it hard to see the truth. But now you know, and that's what matters. You're not weak for falling into his trap. You're strong for getting out of it." It took months for Emily to fully sever her ties with Daniel. There were legal battles, difficult conversations, and moments of immense emotional turmoil. But through it all, Emily never gave up. And neither did I. We both fought together, for her future, for the woman she was becoming. As we navigated the aftermath of everything Daniel had put her through, I could see the change in her. She began to embrace her independence again, this time with more clarity than ever before. She started making decisions based on her own desires and needs, not someone else's expectations. It was as if the fog that had clouded her vision for so long was finally lifting. She was becoming the woman I always knew she could be, the woman I had raised her to be. During this time, I also learned something invaluable. I realized that my role as her mother wasn't just about protecting her from the world, it was about teaching her how to navigate it, how to trust herself, and how to stand firm in her own beliefs. It wasn't about controlling her choices, but about giving her the tools to make the best decisions for herself. I had spent so many years trying to shield her from hurt, from pain, and from mistakes. But in doing so, I had inadvertently denied her the chance to learn some of the hardest lessons in life. The lesson I learned was one of balance. There would be times when my daughter would stumble, when I would need to step back and let her face the consequences of her choices. But there would also be times when she needed me to step in, to remind her of her worth, to protect her when she couldn't protect herself. I realized that, as her mother, my job wasn't to make her life easy, it was to help her become the strongest, most resilient version of herself, capable of weathering whatever storm came her way. Throughout all of this, Emily and I grew closer. We had always had a strong bond, but this experience tested us in ways I hadn't anticipated. We had to face the uncomfortable truths together. We had to admit that our relationship was not without its flaws, that I had made mistakes in how I had protected her. But through it all, we never gave up on each other. The love I had for her, and the love she had for me, was stronger than any manipulation Daniel had tried to use against us. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Emily turned to me with a thoughtful expression on her face. "Mom," she said quietly, "I never realized how much I needed you until now. I always thought I was strong enough to do it on my own, but I see now that I couldn't have gotten through this without you." My heart swelled with pride. "You're stronger than you think, Emily. I've always known you were. But I'm glad you realize that you don't have to do everything alone. You have me, and you always will." Emily smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. "I know, Mom. And I'm sorry. I should have listened to you sooner. I should have trusted you." "You're not the only one who made mistakes," I said, squeezing her hand. "We both have our lessons to learn. But what matters is that we've learned them. Together." As we sat there, surrounded by the quiet peace of the evening, I felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. The storm had passed, and though the scars would take time to heal, we were finally in a place where healing could begin. "I don't think I ever want to let someone control me like that again," Emily said, almost to herself. "I don't ever want to lose myself again." "You won't," I reassured her. "You're too strong for that. And now, you know the signs. You know what to look for. And if anyone ever tries to manipulate you again, you'll recognize it." "I hope so," she said with a hint of uncertainty, but there was a strength in her voice that hadn't been there before. "I think I can do this, Mom. I think I can be independent again. I think I can trust myself." And in that moment, I knew that she had learned the most important lesson of all, that self-trust was the foundation of everything. The foundation of love, independence, and strength. Emily was no longer the woman who had been manipulated. She was the woman who had fought back, who had reclaimed her life, and who had learned the value of trusting herself. What mattered most was not that she had made mistakes, or that she had been hurt. What mattered was that she had found her way back, and she was stronger for it. "Mom," Emily said after a moment, her eyes now reflecting a calm determination, "I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be more than okay." "Yes, you are," I said, my voice full of pride. "You're going to be more than okay. You're going to thrive." The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would still be moments of doubt, still moments when Emily would struggle with the past. But I knew now that she had the strength to face whatever came next. And no matter where life took her, I would always be there, by her side, guiding her when needed, and supporting her when she had to walk alone. And as we sat together that evening, watching the sky darken with the coming night, I realized something else, something just as important. It wasn't just that Emily had grown stronger, it was that our relationship had grown stronger too. We had weathered this storm together, and though the winds had been fierce, we had come out of it on the other side, ready to face whatever came next.